I don't think we would have made a movie together if it weren't for the limitations of the pandemic.
On today's episode, I'm joined by indie filmmaker Steven Kanter, another BuzzFeed alum I had the pleasure of working with back in the day. Steven has brought that scrappy internet content approach to filmmaking, recently releasing his second feature film, Peak Season, co-directed with his collaborator, Henry Lubner.
Does creativity come from absolute freedom, or does it come from constraint? And I truly believe it comes from the latter.
We discuss the process of making a film with only a handful of people. I'm talking like 5 or 6 people max. It's crazy. So if you're an aspiring filmmaker or just interested in film in general, this one's for you. Take some notes and enjoy our conversation. Welcome to Create.Repeat.
Voices in my head telling me it's now or never. Just turned 31, I can't deny the pressure. Even at my best, I know that I can do better. Running out of time, but how the hell can you measure your life? Lately, I've been thinking that I wonder
Cool.
why.
Steven Kanter, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a
All right.
pleasure to be here.
So for our audience who might not know who you are, can you explain what do you do? What's your thing?
Yeah, I am a filmmaker based in Los Angeles. I have made a couple of feature films. One of them came out this year. I believe this will be released probably after it's available.
I think so, but so it's where is it available? Do you know?
Well, it's available wherever you can rent movies. I know
Where
that
is
for
that
sure.
nowadays?
You know, movies.
Yeah.
Movies are basically a medium. No, iTunes, Amazon. It'll be on some kind of a streaming service. I don't know quite yet, but
Great.
that one's called Peak Season. But yeah, filmmaker, musician from Michigan originally, and living out in the city of Angels.
Just
trying
living
to-
the dream.
I guess. Yeah,
Just living the dream.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for people who are just listening to this, Steven and I actually worked together at BuzzFeed. We're both video producers and former collaborators too.
Yeah, that's
Some of my
right.
favorite things I ever did. You were the director and editor and everything. You're still doing exactly what you've always been great at.
The bro trailers,
Yeah.
which we talked about recently, I think.
Yeah.
And I hadn't watched them in a while. Dude, they hold up.
Yeah.
I think they hold up.
We would
did-
make these like fake movie trailers and have this through line of these two friends that were just bros going through these life stages together, and we would just make fun of different genres and
Yeah.
stuff. But what's really funny is when I've been watching the trailers for your feature films, I was wondering in my head, like, did the practice of making these fake trailers help you make an actual feature? Were you hitting those same beats? Was the process the same? I'm
It's
curious.
actually a really good question because so to take it back to like the beginning of just like my interest in film, like
Yeah.
the first videos I was making with my friends in middle school and high school were often like whitest kids type style
Yeah.
sketches, and so a lot of parody, a lot of satire, and a big part of that was movie trailers. I've just always found them to be like, I love movie trailers, but I also think that they're so easy to make fun of because they are a formula. It's a very clear, like kinetic style visual formula.
It's
and
perfect for parody. There's just like
Yeah.
a good container there.
Totally. And so that I've been doing for a very long time. And so when we did it at BuzzFeed, I was like, I was already like stoked that we had the right crew, the right collective with Justin Tan, of course, and then Garrett Werner. But when it came to, so we did cut our own trailers. I want to say the two features I have made, I co-directed and co-worked, basically co-did everything with Henry Lubner, another former BuzzFeed employee, brilliant mind, great collaborator. So we cut both of these trailers, and I will say it probably did help that I had trailer experience, but for whatever reason, it was a mind fuck, basically.
Yeah,
I don't know if I could swear in here,
Sure.
but for whatever reason, I was like, well, but this is like different though, because this is an actual trailer.
It's your actual baby. You're not making fun of it.
I'm not making fun of it.
And you don't want to feel cliche.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it was actually quite a bit harder to just like try to conceptually put it together. The technical parts of it, I think it certainly helped having experience of like, okay, here's how you sort of like slice through different music and try to like
Right.
pick temp tracks that have the right rhythm and how to sort of like almost have like a punchline because it's very musical,
Yeah.
like trailers are so musical. But like, yeah, in this case, it was actually really difficult, like to just try to even think about how do I avoid this being something that I would laugh at.
Yeah.
Unless it's like a joke in the movie, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so meta, that we're so like far removed. Because when you think about when people are making trailers, especially the kinds that we grew up on, the voiceover types like of the 80s and 90s. And then when it got into that more like, I feel like the Jason Bourne movies kind of changed everything with like how trailers were cut, the super quick, fast things. And we made fun of that style as well.
Yeah.
And kind of everything under the sun. But then getting into that moment where you have to do it for real, that's a very unique experience.
Yeah, and it's strange also, like as the filmmaker of that movie, if you're cutting your own trailer, it's trailers are also an interesting sort of intersection between like art and commerce in a way, not to sound like too like lofty or philosophical about it, but it really is. It's like this is ultimately like the movie itself, if you're lucky, is something that you feel proud of, like as an artistic achievement, I suppose. But a trailer, it's like there is an art to it, but that is actually not the end goal. The end goal is like marketing. Like this is essentially, how do I entice people to pay money?
Did you have one of those moments where with the trailer where like as a consumer, when you're watching a trailer, especially a comedy, and you see a funny moment and you're like, that's great. It's like the moment of the trailer. And then you actually get into the movie and the moment is just kind of like a Passover joke.
Oh yeah.
Did you experience that?
With definitely.
Either film. Yeah.
It's interesting because like it's also some jokes, it's like whatever requires the least amount of context typically it's going to be easier to sort of like work into a trailer. But then there's of course like the issue of not wanting to reveal too much.
Yeah.
And that could be with jokes. Certainly it's like we've all seen movies where like the best thing is truly like the final beat of a trailer. And you're just like, like I guess you won because you got me to see this movie, but like I'm kind of bummed out.
Yeah.
So definitely that's another challenge of it, is like you have to be cognizant of like how much are we revealing? Are we wasting a good joke here?
Right.
But then again, this joke is like is good, and it feels like it will like work in the scene. So yeah, it was a lot of deliberation, Henry and I talking through this particular trailer. And also like the movie is, it's like a romantic film, and there's a bit of a love triangle, and it's essentially there's a big thing of like, will she, won't she, or like which guy? I guess I'll say that. And so
it's essentially Twilight. That's what I'm trying to get to the audience to know, is that you made the new Twilight. I'm kidding.
Yeah, take Twilight, remove all of the just insatiably hot people being unnecessarily sexualized, remove all the supernatural elements, and you got my movie.
Yeah, it really is. That's peak season. Please go and rent it or even buy it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. Okay. So I do want to get into this transition into becoming an actual filmmaker. I think ever since I've known you, you have been a filmmaker. You've done short films, even at BuzzFeed. I think, a lot of people might not realize it, but it wasn't just the quizzes. It wasn't just like the cat videos or the lame taste tests, even though we did a bunch of those. You were a part of this whole narrative movement, and you were making these like longer short films. And it's been really interesting because I've been digging into YouTube lately. I've been kind of like dipping my foot back into it and seeing the landscape and going, all right, what's been going on since I checked out of this about 4 years ago? And I'm finding that all of these videos are so much longer now. And I remember like when you were creating these short films, you were like working with Ali Vigiano, who you did The End of Us with. She acted in that with you. You were doing like these like longer narrative style. And I remember them being some like the longest videos that BuzzFeed ever put out. And there's a big debate over that.
Yeah.
But you still found success with that. But doing that filmmaking on a medium that was BuzzFeed, I remember the weirdest thing about it is having like a very serious drama, something that you need taste to kind of watch, and then just be next to like 7 things you didn't know about sexy bugs. And you're like, sexy bugs? What's that? And it would be right next to that. Did that experience of working on those shorts at BuzzFeed help you sort of like hone your craft and figure out like the kind of stories that you want to tell?
Totally and absolutely. And as there's more time between the period I worked at BuzzFeed, like as time goes on, I guess is another way to say that. I'm seeing how beneficial it actually was, because I came into BuzzFeed. There were a number of employees at the time that sort of came in from a less typical sort of background. There were a lot of comedians that were starting up at BuzzFeed, a lot of people that already had like YouTube channels and were, perhaps wanting to do more like influencer type work.
Right.
But I was like, part of a pretty small group that was, interested in like traditional film and media and studied it, went to film school. And so I had like a little bit of admittedly, I had like a little bit of like a chip on my shoulder at the time, where I was like, I'm not, this taste test, this cricket milkshake taste test is beneath me. But at the same time, getting sort of like really humbled when we had to make those videos, because like, I make one and it doesn't really perform well. And YouTube is all about metrics and likes and views, and realizing that, there is like a craft to those videos as well.
Yeah.
And just because, I have some notion of what they look like or what they're supposed to look like doesn't mean like I can't add whatever I want to satisfy me. So like, so that was a part of it. But then, with the short film sort of like tests, I was lucky enough to work with some people you mentioned, Ali Vinciano, Brittany Ashley, on these, really, I mean, talk about like
heavy
topics, like, emotional abuse and sexual assault in one of the videos. And so these were certainly tests, but I think there was a lot of strategy to them going into it. Like, I don't think I would have been able to, I certainly wouldn't have been able to make those myself, because those were not my stories.
Right.
But they were looking at what was like performing well and what were actual topics that people wanted to talk about. And then from there, like, there was a lot of trial and error before that in trying to figure out how do you make something cinematic, but at like hyper speed.
Yeah.
Because that's just the reality.
Yeah. Because you were shooting these in what, like 2 days max?
2 days, very limited crews. And I always liked like the challenge of that, to be like, how expensive can we make this look with nothing? And the truth of the matter is like, you can make it look very expensive. I mean, it's
right.
Then, especially now, it's like the technology has gotten to the point where you can get a $400 camera and you could make something that like looks genuinely like unbelievable with color correction and obviously all the other like elements we have at our disposal. But like I overall I think making scripted stuff at BuzzFeed, there was just a lot of, it was like kind of its own film school.
I 100% agree. I always tell people that I have my master's degree in the internet from there, but then there's a whole other side of it of just being forced to make something every single day and collaborate with people. It was such an invaluable time for me as a person. And like, even like with Create.Repeat, kind of like the mantra of like what we're saying is like, just keep doing it and you will find like your way. And I think that's the thing with BuzzFeed that I really learned is that it's about getting your shots up and trying to like iron out those times and kind of get your 10,000 hours in there. And I think that's what we both got to experience. Obviously there was a stress and a pressure there. It wasn't just like but also there was an amazing opportunity where we were able to have equipment and people on hand. And for the most part, we were able to do a lot of things that we wanted to. I mean, like the Bro trailers is a perfect example of us. Like by the fourth one, we're doing like a body swap Christmas comedy where Santa Claus is kidnapped and like it's like off the rails where there's no way we could have pitched that, 4 videos before that. But like that was an amazing opportunity for us. But like we really got to take that run and gun style and make a bunch of stuff. And it was like that extended film school. I'm really curious because like you have, and we're going to get into your films, but I'm fascinated because what I think makes you and Henry unique is this BuzzFeed style of the run and gun of shooting something really quick and dirty, and kind of this like taking it back to the spirit of like these old indie films of like, you hear like stories of like when they shot Swingers, when Jon Favreau's doing that and they're stealing shots, they're going in the clubs and not telling people that they're filming it, and they're working on the weekends with their friends that are all actors. It's really cool because you and Henry are doing that right now. You have this troupe of people that you've now have made 2 films with, and they don't feel thrown together. Like that's what I really admire about it. And we can get into the actual process of it. Cause I really want to talk about The End of Us, which is like your debut feature. Yeah, and it's just crazy to me that you guys went and you made a film, but also under the circumstances, what it was. Can you talk about that a little bit of like that, I guess, tell us like what The End of Us is, and then tell us about how you got there.
Yeah. So The End of Us, Henry Lovner and myself, we made this was our first feature. And we made it, it's a pandemic movie, right?
It's a pandemic movie. It takes place during COVID times, people.
And we made it, I'm actually all former BuzzFeed. I mean, there were only like 4 people involved in this movie essentially, but, Henry and I had we'd been writing together. We'd written a couple of scripts, and we were, just trying to, this was post the time that we were working at BuzzFeed, and we were, trying to just creatively, like, we have very similar tastes, and just aesthetically, I think like there's a lot of crossover. So we were like, oh, we should write something together. So we were writing, screenplays, and that was going great. And then we were like, well, maybe we should like try to like make like a short like together.
Yeah.
And part of the reason for doing it together was, I think we didn't even maybe articulate it, but it was like we were kind of already used to, again, like with the BuzzFeed, with like the short form sort of just run and gun style. It was almost like preferable to us, like the idea of like, oh, we already know, like we can shoot this, we can edit it, and we can sort of trust each other. And like the less people around, one of the few advantages of that, the less crew you have, the more flexible you are, the more you can sort of like change something in the moment, rewrite something. And then of course it's like relying on actors that are like, that understand that like, this is not, you get your own trailer and you've got your lines, a month before, and we've got wardrobe people before. None of that. It's like actors that are like down, understand, come to play, and typically can improvise. So The End of Us. So pandemic occurs, right? And we were talking about making this short. We were also, I moved into the house that Henry's in.
With Henry, so you're roommates.
Yeah. So we were roommates.
That makes it a little easier, especially during the pandemic.
I think that was the key, because I moved in like 2 months before the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
And we were like, Jesus, like as we all were, like, what's going on? Like everything pauses. And another friend of both of ours, Ben Coleman, a brilliant, hilarious actor, producer, writer extraordinaire, was we were just catching up with him. And well, he's spoken about this publicly, so I feel like it's maybe okay to share. But he was going through a breakup, right? And he and his girlfriend at the time were living together. They were together for a number of years. I think it was 3 or 4 years. And basically right after they broke up, like this is over. We've said our goodbyes. It was like 2 days later, the NBA shut down. And it was like the beginning of the world, like all of us being just, oh, is this going to be like a new reality for a while?
Yeah.
So his prospect of leaving or moving out was shot, and so he was living with his ex-girlfriend, and we were like, okay,
this is too easy. It's just were your like wheels churning the second he told you that?
Yeah, we were just like, this is, and there was so much that we would like check in with him over the next few days, and he would just tell us about like, it's like really awkward because we're trying to like avoid each other in this like apartment in Hollywood. We're trying to break up the schedules of when we brush our teeth, and it's
oh my god.
But we're also talking, and like all of the so our gears were immediately turning. We were like, very quickly after that, I can't remember exactly how the conversation went, but Henry and I were both like, maybe we just like try to be the first people to make a movie during the pandemic.
Right. I feel like that was like the BuzzFeed in you of being like, this is the opportunity is right here for us, and
Yes.
it's kind of a race to that. And
Yes, exactly.
That's what I thought when I saw it. I was like so happy that you guys did that and took advantage of the moment, not in a sinister way, but like
I mean,
jumping at the opportunity.
I think we sort of needed some justification. And here's the other, like, I think the more important component of it is I don't think we would have made a movie together if it weren't for the limitations of the pandemic.
Right.
It was like, not to speak for Henry, I know for me, like, I'm still kind of this way too with like things that I write. I'm just perfectionistic, and I will convince myself a million reasons why I shouldn't do it right now because like, oh, it could be better. It could be better. With this, it was like, well, I mean, it's sort of an even playing field. Everyone has nothing. We have to like, it's that adage of like, does creativity come from absolute freedom or does it come from constraint? And I truly, truly believe it comes from the latter. It comes from constraint.
I agree. I have this idea that I've said to when I've worked with creative teams and stuff, and it's build a fence around the playground, because like when you do have this like infinite amount of things that you can do, a lot of us either get stuck in a cycle or you just get so paralyzed that you can't actually make the thing. And sometimes that restraint forces you to be even more creative.
Yes.
In a way.
Yeah. Cause it's weird. I feel like I'll never fully understand my own like creative process and how much it's linked to my own insecurities. I mean, I think it's like,
isn't that all of us?
That's probably all of us, right? It's like we're attracted to art because it speaks to some sort of truth about the human experience and yada, 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 imperfection. But it is true. And so much I've realized as the years have gone on, like in my career, like so much of my creative output is like directly, running parallel to like my mental health and like state and like it's probably an unhealthy thing, but like so much of my I don't know, so much of my like self-consciousness or self-confidence is tied to these projects. It's tied to the output. And rather than try to run away from that, it's sort of embracing it, and most importantly, I think doing the thing and because no matter what, you're further along. It's like, and that's like the big lesson that the end of us taught me was like, I just in no other circumstance would Henry or myself made this movie because we didn't even have a full script. We were rushing. We were like, let's just like.
How many days did you shoot it?
It was like 2.5 weeks, maybe.
Really?
Maybe less. I mean,
oh my
I think it was maybe 2 weeks. And then this was like March of 2020. We started writing, and Henry and I were just like, look, let's just like see how much writing we can do in the next like week. And we like to call it like a long outline or like a short script.
Yeah. Larry David style.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Very Curb Your Enthusiasm. Like, okay, some scenes are sort of written in with full dialogue. Other ones are like a slug line, and it's like, Ben's character, Nick, annoys, Amy in this scene or whatever. And we were like, great, okay, that'll be good enough. We can rely on Ali Vingiano and Ben.
Yeah.
And
they're both
leads.
Amazing improvisers and actors. And so, yeah.
Oh, like absolutely essential too, because like, again, to expect these actors to like join us and also not get paid anything,
right.
Like.
You're like, you have nothing going on. We're just friends. We're going to make a movie. Are you down?
Yeah.
Can you, for a second, ignore the horrors that are going on in the world and make a movie about it? I think that's what's fascinating to me is that you guys are able to, in real time, capture what was going on. So I just rewatched the film last night.
Oh.
And I loved it. And I liked it the second time more than the first time. I think partly because of how far I'm now removed, how we all are removed from the pandemic. When the first time I saw it, I feel like I still had some like open wounds from that time, and it was like so real.
Yeah.
But then watching it last night, I was just thinking about how, not to try to like puff you up a little bit, but like it's an amazing moment in time that is documented of showing what that era was like. I think we can call it an era now, and like having this I mean this in the best way. It's a small movie. It's a small idea of these characters that are the awkwardness of breaking up and being together, and the idea of like, should one person go on and see someone else, or what are they going to do? Like it's all these like very relatable small ideas, but the movie itself, I think when you take sort of like a step back and you look forward, you look at it after a couple of years past, it's outside of it being an amazing accomplishment that you guys already did it. I think it really is going to resonate as like a weird history thing that people are going to look at and study. That's how I kind of felt.
Capsule.
It is a time capsule. Yeah. And I think, I know that there's these other avenues. People were vlogging. I remember there was this basketball player, Matisse Thybulle, when they were in the bubble, he was vlogging every day, and it was awesome. And I think that's a really cool thing. But to be able to tell a story and through art, and also use that, you were saying how like your creative process is kind of linked to your mental health and the projects that you're doing. I'm curious about that more, because the pandemic, it was a really tough time. Honestly, it was an extremely tough time for me and what I was going through. And was diving into your art kind of like the only option that you had to deal with everything that was going on? I'm very curious about that.
I think that's kind of spot on. And I would be surprised if everybody else like involved in the end of us wouldn't agree. I mean, we made it so quickly after the pandemic really sort of became like a global lockdown that we didn't know how long the pandemic would go for, right?
That's what I'm so curious about, because like the movie, as you're going, like you're having these real beats and moments that were kind of happening in real time. And I remember that first lockdown, it was like 2-3 weeks maybe that it was supposed to be, and then it ended up being months.
It was months. Yeah. I mean, we were before shooting every day. So we like, even just to rewind for a second, we also didn't even know, it was before there was like official CDC testing guidelines, and obviously like Hollywood was shut down and businesses were shut down, but like we were like, okay, how do we actually do this? And also not like do something that we're going to get like torched for because we did this like in an unsafe way. So we were actually most concerned about that. We were like, okay, we want to be some of the first people to like try to make this movie, take on this challenge. How do we do it in a way where we're not going to have to like lie? Oh, I guess we just have to do the right thing. But the right thing, we didn't know. We didn't know what that was.
We were still like, there was no consistent rule at that time. And
So we were like, all right, we know that we can, self quarantine or sort of isolate. Henry and I were already living in the same house, sort of locked down in that sense. And so our two actors, Claudia Restrepo, who produced it, everybody quarantined for however long it was. It was like 2 weeks. And that was like, okay, that's our pre-production. Like that's great. That's the window of time we get for pre-production. We found an Airbnb in Eagle Rock, and it basically, we were like, okay, we just go immediately to the Airbnb, and then we were like locked down at this Airbnb, which was great though, because it like, it had like a large backyard, and it was, I think for all of us, it was, again, not knowing how long the pandemic would go on. Even at that point, everything was so dismal. Everybody was on their phones and computers and just like looking at graphs of like death counts and
all the doom scrolling.
Yeah, doom scrolling. And it felt like a real like respite from all of that, just to like have like a project that we could sort of work on and like pour ourselves into. It's like, it's really odd to look back at the pandemic like in like a positive light, but I mean, I have to say, I do kind of like, it was actually, what I remember from it was this movie and like making this movie. And I don't know. I think I like mental health wise, like I would have been in a much worse place if I hadn't done something. If I hadn't been working on something that was for me versus like just checking in at work and the whole Zoom,
it was terrible
catastrophe and all that. So
I had a buddy that was working at Zoom at the time, and so his stock options were great.
Oh wow,
he's the only person I knew that had a good time.
Oh, he had a great pandemic. Yeah,
but that it just looked. Rewatching it last night, there was something that struck me was when Allie's character goes and gets tested, and I don't know where you shot it, but it was like when you're in your car in the line. Like I remember I went to Dodger Stadium to get tested that first time.
Yeah.
And I completely forgot that I did that. And so seeing that, I thought that was just so cool that you captured that in this story in a very natural way. You know, like sometimes when you're watching a film and they go to a real life event or something, like say the movie is being shot at the Super Bowl and there's shots like at the Super Bowl, and you know, you're like, this is like a second unit crew and it looks like cheesy. It looks just out of sorts. And then, you know, I'm thinking of the movie with Will Smith and Margot Robbie for some reason. I don't know, but Focus.
Oh, Focus. Yeah.
It's underrated. So the second half of this podcast, we're going to be talking about Focus. Hope you came prepared. But I thought that was so interesting, showing those testing things. It was just things I kind of blacked out of my mind. And I only would have that realization, you know, a couple years out of this, looking at that. And the other thing too is I think you really captured Allie's character was that doom scroller, was the person she got laid off, and she's going through that where Ben's character is very much the like has to be reminded to wear a mask. Eventually he becomes that guy, which I thought was like a pretty funny character.
I mean, he's a total buffoon in the movie. I mean, he's an absolute
even the beginning when he's doing the audition in the beginning, he's kind of doing this like Smeagol kind of impression. I hope other people have this. Obviously, like I know Ben and Allie, but I just thought they were so amazing in it, and the style that you guys are doing, it feels like you're capturing moments versus forcing moments. And even like you're saying, that's why I was kind of shocked when you said that you shot it in about 2 or 2.5 weeks, because the film doesn't feel rushed. Like each scene feels lived in, and it feels like very like how the pandemic was, where it was day 1, day 2, time was going by so slow and you kind of lost track of time. And I thought the film really handled that well. And I don't know if that was is intentional or if that was like a sign of the subject nature, but
yeah, well, thank you. I mean, it's been a while since I've actually rewatched it. I wonder if I'll have that same experience. Like,
I recommend it, even though I know it's tough sometimes to watch your own things.
That's the other thing too. But you know, that movie, you know, as I mentioned kind of like before, like the flexibility that is afforded, you know, when you're a really, really, really nano budget production and a tiny crew, like so Henry and I, like for the most part, try to shoot in order, right?
Interesting.
In our loose sort of conception of this movie, we were like, let's try to shoot in order. That way we can like revise on the go and figure out what is actually working in the story, what's not working in the story. And we ended up like, I mean, we reshot that introduction scene. We actually did like, I think that was like the 3rd time we shot that.
Interesting. Wow.
Because the first time it was just too serious and like kind of sullen, and it was just like, it didn't really capture like how like kind of goofy the movie is. And like kind of, I don't know, just
goofy,
tonally.
just like the whole idea of it, of being stuck with your ex. Like it's a very like, you could have taken it like a whole slapstick route too.
Yeah.
You know, like if we would have made a bro trailer about it, like which also is still on the table.
Still on the table. It's always on the table.
It's very topical.
But yeah, I mean, that was what you brought up about like the movie not feeling like we were trying too hard to be like, look at this experience we're going through. Like, look how terrible. Like, that was the biggest conversation Henry and I had in making that movie. Like, and it always is, especially if you're co-directing, like kind of the most important thing oftentimes is like, okay, well, what actually is like the tone of this film? And we, through trial and error, like early on, we were sort of shooting it. Something felt off. And part of it was just, we had too many beats and scenes and moments that were, again, it just felt like we were going through like a carousel of like, what are all of the COVID beats versus like, okay, how about those things are not actually what people give a shit about? And like, it should be like these characters. And then of course what they're doing and like the things that they actually have to be doing, you know, in this weird time. Yes, those are going to be aspects of the movie, but we never wanted to make it just feel like it was taking itself too seriously.
Totally. I think that was the correct move, because I didn't like, it was really refreshing to see something that it was funny, it had heart in it, and it had like this I don't know, like Ben. I just love Ben as an actor. He has this like silliness to him mixed with the gravitas. Like he's an actor, right? Like and like the character is an actor as well. And I think that was like such a great choice because he pulls off the like swing. There's a great scene in the movie when he's where it just cuts to like camera footage of him auditioning for like a student film, and I remember the first time it made me laugh. The second time, it's just like a jump cut right into it. And it really got me, and just like the seriousness in his face. But like you guys did such a great job of just navigating a very difficult subject matter and making it lighthearted, because that was the reality of it. Obviously, people had a terrible time, but also there was like stretches in there where it was just like monotonous, and this is a day, and sometimes it's as silly as your partner is playing a little accordion thing that's driving you nuts and you need to freak out about that, or
the melodica. Yeah,
the melodica. That's the word I'm searching for.
Oh god, I love melodicas.
Is that your melodica?
Yeah.
I figured,
and it's so annoying. Like I think that we pulled that. We knew that scene was going to be in the movie from like.
Did you like write the theme with like?
Oh yeah.
I'm very curious about that, because I didn't. Sorry if I'm jumping all over this, but I'm really interested because you do have a musical background, which I knew lightly. I think I saw you play like piano once or something. I was like, oh wow, he's got skills. But I know 3 songs on the piano, and it's just like kind of a party trick where I can play 3 because, you know, if you're good, someone will ask you play another one, you play 2, but no one's ever going to really ask you for a 3, let alone 4 songs until you're getting paid. So that was my trick, always, is learn that. But like, I'm curious because I didn't realize as I was looking through the IMDb credits for like these films and Peak Season 2, like you've done like scores and the theme for it. That's you really are wearing all of the hats.
Well, yeah. So I was able to do not the entire musical score for these movies. Maybe on our next production I'll have the bandwidth to be able to do it. But like, yeah, it was it's something that's always, you know, been important to me, where it's like music, film is probably, it's tricky. Like sometimes I like music more than movie. Like, sure. Just because there's just an immediacy to music that I've just always really, really loved and been affected by. I think probably most people would agree. Like it's such a universal kind of like language. And also I think that film and like visual storytelling, like, to me, is like more similar to music than anything else, because it's like a temporal art form. Mm-hmm. You know, there's rising action. You know, things fall, things rise. You're sort of tracking one thing through time. And I played piano growing up, and was forced into taking classical lessons. I hated it, and until I got really into 60s and 70s like funk keyboard jazz type stuff, and I just stuff. Went all in. But yeah, so the theme, so the Airbnb we shot at for The End of Us, the owner is a musician. He's like a traveling like musician, and he just had all of these like random, like kind of amazing antique pieces of musical instruments. Yeah. And so he had like a Fender Rhodes, which I've like always wanted. Nice. Like I have like a wish list of like musical items that one day. And so we would we had a lot of time, obviously, because we were living where we were shooting this movie. And so, I think that theme, that kind of John Bryan sort of, descending kind of almost Parisian sounding kind of whimsical thing. I think I wrote that at the house, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, on the roads, and then I taught it to Ben so that he could be playing it throughout the movie.
Well, it's just so good too, because like the final scene is Ben playing it, and then Claudia's character has the flute and like joins him, and it's kind of it's like a very sweet thing. But I just love when the music is involved into the story, and so you have him playing it as the theme's going. Like I thought that was a really great touch. But
nice.
The whole music side of you, I think that's really fascinating. I'm really intrigued because like wearing all these different hats, how many people were in the crew for The End of Us?
3. it was me, Henry, and Claudia, and then if you count the actors, our 2 main actors, Ben and Allie, who would help if they weren't in a scene. So,
Yeah.
up to 5.
So they would they be like holding the bounce or
yeah,
running audio or
if
something?
they weren't in the scene together, for sure. But if it wasn't that way, Henry and I would either have, we ran 2 cameras. We would try to, I think that movie was, a lot of it was like on sticks. It was on tripod. And so that way one of us could be like on sound or monitoring the lavs on sound. And then the other person had a script out too, and was like, and we would, we'd sort of trade off. And I will say, in retrospect, it always, I always look at it fondly, but it's also hard. It's like physically exhausting. And yeah.
Do you like directing while holding a camera? Like the Spike Jonze or those types of cameras who are like, really notorious for like, give me the camera, let me get my shot. Like, do you enjoy that? Are you able to focus on the acting or?
I think I did for a long time, probably more just because I was more comfortable with it, because so much of the stuff that we were shooting, even
you grow
BuzzFeed,
up that way. That's how you direct your first things, is holding it. So
I think as time has gone on, and there have been a few sort of there've been different sort of work projects that I've been able to sort of like have like a larger crew and like be able to just like be holding. I need to be holding something, that's for sure. I'm like I'm the person who's like rolls up a piece of paper.
This is just terrible for you right now.
It's tough. I don't know what to do with. I mean, God, I was just like, my hands are just picking at themselves. But like, I think at this point, like the ideal would be to not have to hold a camera,
right?
And like be near the camera, and be able to like check the frame. But it's just so much better to be able to focus on one thing.
Yeah.
And be able to actually, because the trade-off, when you're running the camera and you're shooting something like this, yes, you, in a way, you're kind of in sync with it visually, because you're just, there's no separation between you and the image, right?
Yeah.
But like, you're not actually watching the performance as clearly. You're watching like geometric figures, and you're doing like rule of thirds, and you're like making sure that things aren't peaking, and and for a while I was like, I could do both at the same time. You can't. You definitely can't. Like it's you can't multitask, right?
Yeah. I guess like the only way to do it is if you have like a co-director who's also doing it, and just praying that in between, hopefully there's something good here. Would you guys do like rehearsals first, like with the actors, to kind of get a sense of the scene, and then so you could try to do your directing for the performance in that situation, and then get behind the camera? Or were you just kind of like, let's shoot everything?
With both movies, we rehearse some of the scenes. I think the sort of meatier, like longer page count scenes, I think we typically would have the actors kind of run through. Honestly, less for them and more for us, just to be like, how does this sound? Like, does this? Yeah, because the words like, actually work. Like,
that's always weird when you write something and then you hear it out loud for the first time, and you're like, oh, this is either terrible, or oh wow, this isn't so bad, or I didn't realize that was a joke. When I wrote that, yeah.
Or you sort of suddenly realize like, oh, this is kind of a redundant line, or like even just there, going back to like I see a lot of film as like very similar to music. There is a rhythm to this medium, and you can just tell sometimes, like it's hard to articulate, but you can just tell when you're like, even like in a script read through where people are just sitting at a long desk and just going through like a TV episode.
Yeah.
There's the writer's rhythm, and sometimes it feels too perfect.
Yep.
Feels too writery, as people say.
It's how I feel about Emily in Paris. Sometimes just the dialogue is just way too witty. You didn't come up with that in the moment.
I love that you expect this out of Emily in Paris. You're like, no,
that was my first thought after both films. I'm like, you know what? I think he also watches EIP.
I haven't caught it yet, but I wouldn't not watch it. I just haven't gotten around to it. I've heard good things.
Look, I mean, it's not for everybody, but it's for me.
Yeah, I mean, what is that, season
It's on.
3 now?
I think 4 just came out.
Wow.
And great, they're capitalizing off the Olympics in Paris. It's just,
oh my God, yeah.
I have no
course.
notes for that. A few notes for about your films. Just kidding. Okay, so now after doing The End of Us, I think another thing that was really interesting is the film gets into South by Southwest, but it was a virtual South by Southwest because of COVID.
Yeah.
That's ironic.
Yeah.
Did that like? How was that for you? Because I can imagine it's like such a high of like, wow, I know about this festival. It's something that any filmmaker or musician like knows of this. Oh, I get to go to Austin. I'm gonna do that. And then now we're doing these panels over Zoom and watching through a link. How was that? Did that kind of kill the momentum? Was it bittersweet?
It was bittersweet. Yeah. I mean, in a sense, I think like poetically, it's
kind of perfect.
It's kind of perfect that this movie, like, of course, like, I mean, we were so unbelievably excited when we found out about getting to South by Southwest. Like that was like its own kind of like diesel fuel, like straight to my my life for like a few months.
You just justified film school. It was just right there.
Yeah. I mean, I think it wasn't like it was a letdown in the moment by any means. I mean, it was still the festival did actually, I think a really good job of like, how do we sort of adapt this,
right,
for like sort of a virtual venue? But I think it was also, we didn't know what it would be like otherwise. Like I'd visited, I'd gone to Sundance just as like an audience member before, and obviously other, festivals, but because this was our first time, having a feature in a festival, we didn't really know what we were missing.
Yeah.
And so with like peak season, we were fortunate enough to like get into South by again. And it felt like, I mean, it was just like so amazing because it felt like it was going to the festival for the first time. We were like able to actually like get the
but then you still have
experience.
like kind of the wisdom of like, okay, this is what it's probably going to look like.
Yeah,
we've done these Q&As before, or we know the kind of schedule of that.
Exactly.
But then getting to experience it in real time. I mean, even just seeing like, the photo shoots that you guys got to do and all this stuff. It just looked, it looks so fun. I was like, as a fan, I was so excited to see that.
It was the best week ever. I mean, but like truly the thing that you just can't ever replicate in a virtual setting is people that you don't know, that aren't family and friends, like going to see your movie and seeing the movie and then like being in a room together, and you're like, that is the thing that like for me with peak season, it was just like, that was the most exciting kind of like riveting part of it. I mean, kind of terrifying, of course, too.
Yeah.
But it's ultimately so rewarding. I mean, not even to say that everybody loved the movie and thought it was the greatest movie of all time, but it's just like the fact that people are taking time out of their day to like go and see this thing that we made.
That isn't a superhero movie. That's like a very like intimate film about a relationship.
Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah.
That's so cool. I do want to get into peak season now, which is the film that came out this year. Yeah. I'm really interested because, like you're saying, like with the first one, you had these constraints of COVID and the lockdown, and it was sort of like a buzzy idea of like a no-brainer situation where this one is, I would love for you to talk about it, but it isn't that. It is much more of like we could do whatever we want. It's as wide open as Jackson Hole, Wyoming. But yeah, tell me about peak season. What's this film about, and then how did that come about?
Yeah. So you're pretty on the money with like sort of our Henry and my approach to peak season. I mean, it was still a very small production.
How many crew this time?
I mean, you could add maybe one person.
Oh my gosh.
The fantastic Patrick Ward, who was like our lifesaver out there. But it's a film that's, it's set and it takes place in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. It's about a young woman who travels there with her fiance, and he has, he kind of comes from money. She has, she's second generation sort of American parents or, immigrants. So different kind of backgrounds for them, but they're engaged. They met in business school, and they're going to this kind of like amazing home that he's just like, his family is just like, yeah, we're only there for 6 months out of the year, which is very true to that part of the country. There's a very, very wealthy, very affluent, and a lot of coastal sort of families, live there for part of the year. So they go to spend, like basically kind of like a summer vacation there. Ben, who plays the fiance, he's also like a workaholic. He ends up having to kind of like spend a lot of his time and focus working, putting out fires for his high-powered job.
Yeah,
and so she ends up on this like fishing trip with a character by the name of Lauren, who's played by Derek DeBlasis, another former BuzzFeed creative, and it's a movie about their friendship, perhaps blossoming into something else. But it's a movie that's just about this sort of, I think a lot of people might relate to the kind of weird thing that happens when you're traveling, whether it's a vacation or if it's for work or whatever. You're in a new place and like, it's hard to know why this happens, but it's like something's more open about you.
Yeah.
Maybe because you're in a new environment, you're not comfortable, you're like seeing things a little bit more clearly. And then sometimes like the relationships that you have that very often are just like over a few days, whether they're friendships or something more, like, I don't know, there's something about them that is like, it's hard to describe. It's cinematic.
Yeah.
And so this movie definitely kind of like, captures a big part of that, but it's essentially about this relationship. Yeah.
I love that too. It kind of reminds me of like the adult version of when you'd go to like summer camp and you'd meet like a girl and you know her for like 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
And you'd have that connection and then you leave and it's like, but you still like, dang, that's the one that got away.
Totally.
That was kind of that same feeling. And I totally understand that. Like when you go on a vacation somewhere, you're kind of playing a different character in that spot. I'm the kind of person, like if I touch down in Texas, I need a cowboy hat. I just feel like out of place. Or I'm in New York, I'm like, all right, how are we dressed in here? I want to feel and pretend that I live here.
Yeah.
I think you capture that. And I love a good film where the backdrop is a character. I think with Jackson Hole, you get that. You have these amazing just landscape shots of the scenery and there's this whole scene where they go on like a whole hike for a day and then they're kind of up at the top and it's a really great scene between the two. It's kind of like the beginning of this relationship that you're looking at, but it's almost distracting in how beautiful the landscape is. I'm curious about that specifically. Because when I know that you're having like a crew of 4 and there's a whole scene where they're hiking, you had to do the hiking.
Yeah.
What was that day like?
Oh man. It was probably the most challenging thing any of us have done like in our professional lives. Like so that scene that day was, I mean, there were a lot of challenges as there always are in any kind of production or movie, but like this was the one. This was the day. So I mean, it's an important sequence in the movie. The characters go on a long hike and they finally get up to this beautiful lake, and then sort of the apex, not to be overly esoteric about it, but it is true that like the characters are kind of learning about each other, they're getting to know each other, and then there's sort of an emotional moment, a sort of apex like that happens when they're actually at the top of the mountain. So we were, really obviously excited about the scene. Given our limitations, we didn't have the luxury of like scouting these different trails because it takes like half a day to get to some of them. So Henry's family, so the connection to, just real quickly with Jackson, like, so I'd never actually been to Jackson. I knew very, very little about Wyoming.
Mm-hmm.
Henry, his family has lived there for I think close to 20 years at this point.
Oh, wow.
So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so he spent like a good deal of time, sort of out there, summers, and he did like summer camps. He worked at like dude ranches and stuff. And so that was the impetus for this story, was to make a movie out there, but also, to utilize the resources that his family, was able to sort of help us with, whether it be like staying at their place while we're shooting the movie, or like asking for recommendations, like, hey, do you know like what would be a good place to shoot this scene or this moment?
Because I mean, the main character is a local person, and to have 2 people making this film that aren't locals, that adds up. Then having that there, because you don't want it to feel like an outsider film to that community.
Oh yeah, no, that was our, it still is. I mean, it's like my biggest fear. And so Henry and I have been like extremely cautious about making sure that we're like at every moment of making the movie, whether before shooting, during shooting, or especially in like editing. Okay, like we need to make sure that this like is just capturing a story and we're not trying to sort of prescribe like some take on this place as if we are, the locals. And so we did actually like a number of like interviews with a lot of wilderness guides, because Lauren's character is a wilderness guide, and it's a local term called skids, specific to the Jackson Hole community.
I like it.
And they're, a lot of, it's a very wide range of like, outdoors people, that some of them live in their cars, some of them live, in neighboring communities because of the expense of Jackson, but they work throughout the year through different seasons, doing fishing lessons in the summer, snowboarding and avalanche patrol in the winter. And so we actually interviewed quite a number of these people kind of through mutual friends of Henry's family. And that was like especially helpful for us to be like doing our diligence to make sure that we're not making something that feels like we're interlopers, like just coming in to like, colonize this story, if you will, So that was important. But back to the hike day. Yeah. We weren't able to scout. So we ended up just using one of the hiking apps, All Trails, I think. All Trails.
Free promo.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
This is the ad. And we landed on Delta Lake. It's called Delta Lake. We landed on it because, like, as you'll see if you watch the movie, I mean, when you reach this sort of point, it is like, I mean, it truly is like a screensaver or like wallpaper. Like, you're just like, come on, man. Like, so we were like, okay, we got to get to there. And we were like, okay, this is going to be a long day, but if we prepare for this right, we might be able to do it. I mean, we take our time, it's like 10 miles out and back, right?
Yeah.
So, it was like 5 or 6 miles going up, which, yes, that's a long hike, but we're taking breaks. We've got like food with us, obviously water. Dude, I mean, there's no amount of prep that would have like gotten us ready for this, because the other hard part is like, oh yeah, we're like making a movie too.
Yeah. You have a job to do. Like, once you get there, you have to now start performing. And
I gotta say, I mean, it's certainly, nobody had an easy job. And I personally think that Derek DeBlasis and Claudia Restrepo, the two leads, like I don't know how they did it, because as actors, like to be comfortable and to like not have to they had to do everything not only were they like bringing some of the gear and stuff, but they like have to like deliver on these scenes. And we have to like avoid extras and other people on the trail, and so we would have to constantly reset. And we shot it sort of by design. We wanted to make it like long takes. We're shooting like on a super long lens, like down from the top of a trail, and they're kind of coming up to us. Partially just to like feel lived in with it, but also because like that's going to be easier to shoot and to sort of like be low profile. So yeah, there were so many challenges. The actors absolutely killed it. Again, I don't know how they managed to like keep their composure, because it was a lot of lines too. It was like,
I mean, like I was saying, like it's a pretty important scene for their relationship. I feel like it's kind of the first time that they're being vulnerable with each other and getting to know each other. It's that part of the film where you're kind of unsure about both characters until this moment, because the audience, you're just watching them live their lives, and then you're starting to see more, and you're like, oh, I kind of like this. I've seen Claudia's character be with Ben, and he's hilarious in his own way, but also you're like, I don't love him with her. And now you're seeing Derek, who's this like very kind of quirky guy, and they have that moment. But yeah, it looks like if this was a studio movie, that would have been at least like a 5-day thing.
Oh yeah.
And you guys are just doing that in a day. And I imagine like what you're saying with the last one, where it's just like, it's physically taxing, because you're also carrying your camera equipment and you're doing all that stuff. That is
middle of July in Jackson, which is very hot.
Yeah.
Very hot. yeah, we all slept very well that night after. But
it's that moment where you're like, why didn't we just write another pandemic movie?
I mean, yeah, we were like, there were points where there was a point like it's like the last half mile up. Unfortunately, we didn't really learn in our research that the hike just gets harder as it goes up. Some hikes, it's like I don't know, like you go through a certain area, then it like plateaus, and then you're like, it's a little bit easier. This was just like progressively harder and harder and harder until finally the last the last chunk of it is like essentially like a rock hill. So like these mini boulders. And
oh my gosh.
You're like basically like you have to like climb these boulders. So we had to like put the equipment away and like we had to like pass it to each other. And there were a couple of moments where we were like, are we going to be able to do this? Like, is this actually like unsafe? And, fortunately we were able to like kind of like take a beat, rest, and sort of figure out like a plan. And then by the time we got to Delta Lake, we were just like, oh, this is so worth it.
I imagine just seeing that view is just energizing to be like, all right, let's roll. This is why we're here. We're friends making a movie. How many days did this film take to shoot?
We shot in Wyoming for 3 weeks. And then we did some like probably maybe like 5 days worth of pickups in and around LA, afterwards. But yeah, like the main production, I think it was like exactly 3 weeks. 3 weeks. Yeah.
Wow. And I think there's something too about like going on location where it is very much like, it's different when you are shooting in LA and you got an Airbnb. Like if you miss something, if you had to do a pickup, like, okay, we can get that. When you're at this lake, like you kind of have the one chance.
Oh man. Yeah. It's, there's pros and cons to it all, right? Like shooting on location versus like in a controlled set.
Yeah.
I mean, the pros of this, we got incredibly lucky with so many things, location specific, like, and weather specific.
Yeah.
Like there's moments in the story where I don't want to like reveal too much, necessarily, but like where you have like a lightning strike.
I was watching it like, there's no way. Like how did that happen? It's just crazy. But yeah, I don't want to give away what that part is, but you're just gonna have to see it for yourself. But
but I mean, so many locations too. Like we still had a decent level of flexibility, like with being there, living there while shooting the film. I guess it's similar to The End of Us in some ways, where like we would be driving one day from something we just shot at a lake, back over to base camp or whatever, and we would like see like a ravine and just the way the light was hitting it, and then we would just be like, okay, add to the Google Maps, like label
drop
or
the pin.
And we would just be like, wow, like we're already a week into this movie and we have like so many backups and we have so many like other locations that we could use. It was great.
That's great. Yeah. And even just thinking about like the creative, like having the playground, the fence around the playground. I guess you do have that with being in Jackson Hole and knowing that you only have these certain amount of dates and you're fighting daylight and you're trying to make these things happen. I'm seeing like a pattern for you of that. And maybe that is like the BuzzFeed in us that like taught us that, if you only have like the 2 days or the 1 day to get the thing, you got to get it. It doesn't matter.
Absolutely. It's the lesson that I think I will have to keep relearning and relearning. And I think it's like, I was just talking to a friend the other day about like with writing specifically, like the most important thing, like, well, the hardest part is the beginning. Hardest part is starting, because like looking at a blank page and just like the little cursor like mocking you, just like, you don't do this.
Yeah,
like,
it's just like
do it tomorrow. Do it in 2 weeks. Actually, you should rework the outline. It's like the crazy shit that my mind will come
Mayday,
up with.
I've been hit. That I experienced that.
And it's like
daily.
the thing that it's almost like self-deception where I have to convince myself that this is the only way. And it like, you know what I mean? Like I have to be like, no, I don't have more time to do this. Like this is it. And it'll be bad. It's fine. You know what I mean? Like even that is more important than the alternative, which is like, make it perfect.
Yeah.
It's like that. You'll never make anything.
Did you feel any kind of pressure with this film being like the second one, especially because the first one was so much more of like this is fun. We don't know what this is going to like. We want to make a movie, but there's no pressure here. But now that you've made a film, it got into South by Southwest. Now this is the follow-up for you two guys. Was there a pressure there?
Yeah. I think there wasn't pressure that I think we felt because it was just because it was the second movie and we got very lucky with the reception of our first one. I think it was more what we were going for tonally in this movie. We were a little nervous about because it's it's still definitely like it's a funny movie. Like there's a lot of humor throughout. There's some very funny characters. But it's also there's more sincerity to it.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
I think sincerity, that's that thing that
it's so hard being earnest. Who would have thought?
Especially now. Like I think that's something I think about a lot too. I mean, you can kind of see it in culture with what films are popular, what musical artists are popular, or whatever. It's like I think because of the age of the internet, because of the sort of sardonic sort of way in which we're all sort of like tapped in and know the memes and sort of like understand like everything. Mm-hmm. We're all experts, I guess. There's this like sarcasm and there's this real like fear of trying to make something that's like earnest or sincere and then just being totally rejected. Like, oh, you posing, like insert whatever your worst fear is. Like, so we were very like, okay, if we're going to do this, like that was the biggest fear for me, at least like creatively. Yeah.
It's you're showing yourself completely there. And also like, I think the subject matter is like this like gray area too with relationships and like having, where you're meeting these characters and like the plans that they have for life and then introducing new people into their life. And, obviously, like you said it before, it's sort of like this love triangle thing. And I was curious going into it, like how I was going to feel towards the end of it, of like, however this plays out, like they have some choices that they need to make. And, there's, and it's like, oh, is this like a date movie that you like bring with your significant other or whatever? I think that's like, I just think it was like a very fascinating thing to tackle. But yeah, you're being vulnerable in a very big way. I mean, it's a movie.
I guess you're right. Yeah, actually, you just pointed out another fear, which was also like, it's a movie that, without revealing too much, I mean, it's a movie that a lot of it is about the gray area.
Yeah.
The script, the very, very first iteration of the script was actually, so Henry wrote this script, I think at least a year before we even talked about working on it together.
Wow.
It sort of came up when we had so many false starts with stories, because of budget, really. It was all like logistical. We came up with this great, buddy comedy movie, but it was just like, oh, we can't afford this. And for us to try to make this, we, have to try to like develop it with like a studio, which, could be an option, but we were getting stir crazy to make something again.
Yeah.
And so he had written this script and maybe it was like a couple of passes, but it was pretty early days for him with it. And he shared it. And then from there, we kind of took it. But from the very beginning, that gray area, that sort of like being okay making a movie that isn't, for lack of a better word, like spoon feeding you what you necessarily, and also not trying to just subvert expectations for subversion's sake.
Yeah.
I think we're kind of coming out of a period of maybe like too many things kind of trying to be subversive just because it's like, well, whatever you think it's going to be the opposite. And that's why it's genius. It's like, no,
comedies are dramas and dramas are comedies now.
Yeah. Right. And there's great ways of doing that too, but it's like, you should be following like the character. You should be like following what at least you think the character is like needs to happen or needs to do. And yeah, I just thought like from the beginning, like the first time I read that early script, like I was just like, I was actually genuinely kind of moved by it and surprisingly found myself relating to Amy, the main character played by Claudia.
Because she's at a crossroads in her life. And I think like, even if you aren't in a specific a relationship kind of moment, but she's just at a moment in her own life, which is very much our age group in our early 30s, going through this like, all right, now's the time that we're our 20s are over, we're done messing up, we really kind of have to pick a lane. And I think that's something that we all in our generation are kind of feeling, that pressure. And so to have a character going through a specific situation, but that is very much like played through the theme, and I think every character is kind of dealing with that kind of hurdle that they have to get to. They all have to kind of make a decision of what's next in their life.
That's spot on. I mean, that's really well said. I think Lauren and Amy, those two characters are sort of on different sides of a coin, I suppose. Although I think it's more like a die. There aren't just two types of.
No, it'd be boring if it was. There would be no gray area.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, I think Lauren is like in a very different way. It's like just that question of like, at what point at what point can I no longer like have like a life-changing decision?
Yeah.
Which is like a terrifying thing to ask yourself, and you don't really expect it because you always feel like you're young, right?
Yeah.
You're always like, no, I'm like, yeah. And then you're like, wait,
I'm sure people like our parents' age listening to this right now are like, no, I'm still young.
Or they're like, no, you feel old when you're when your body doesn't
go on TikTok for 5 minutes and you'll feel old real quick.
Man. Yeah. That's why I avoid TikTok.
Yeah. That's probably good. Making these films now pretty much back to back with like a really small crew. I'm interested, like, is this something that you want to do again? Like, do you want to do this like kind of quick guerrilla style with friends? Do you have to, finish the spiritual trilogy here because like with the actors, it's sort of the side characters from the first film are now the main characters, and the main character is the side character. I think that's just really cool to see these actors shine in a different way, and they're all fantastic in it.
Yeah.
But yeah, is this something that you want to continue to do specifically too with you and Henry as collaborators? Are you guys? I know like the reason for getting into this and starting it, but now that you have 2 films under your belt, is this something that you want to continue?
Yeah, it's that is the question. Definitely. Okay. In terms of collaborations together, for sure. There are things that we're writing and even sort of actively kind of shooting that are not any one project, but are sort of like tonal kind of tests.
Yeah.
We do have like a comedy series thing that we're sort of putting together. It's basically a web series. We don't like to call it that because
what? I'm pro bring back the web series. I'm pro. Do it.
I mean, it's like I think enough time is elapsed.
It's a lost art.
Yeah, because I think there was a period, especially like in LA, probably New York as well too, where it's like everybody was on a web series.
Yeah, it was the podcast before the podcast.
Yeah, and it was a little oversaturated, but so in terms of working with each other, for sure, and we're the stuff that we're making now, even in that capacity, is like very low profile. A lot of the same actors, a lot of the same, Patrick Ward helping us again.
Amazing.
In terms of the bigger projects, I think yes, and the idea is like, how can we continue to sort of raise the bar and raise the scale without sacrificing the main core element that worked. So we did that actually to an extent with Peak Season versus The End of Us. The End of Us was smaller by almost every metric. Peak Season was a step ahead with like the scale, the amount of locations, the amount of characters, even like narratively it was I think a bigger swing. And so I think the next thing would be bigger swing. I believe there's a big conversation and perhaps disagreement about like at what point does indie film, at what point does it lose what makes it have advantages?
Right.
Meaning, or in other words, like at what point, how much money?
Yeah.
What are you getting from your bigger budget? What are you actually getting? And is it just making it a bad studio movie? Like, or is it making it harder to make? And so that's the thing that we're always sort of thinking about. But I think there's quite a bit of a ceiling. I think that we could get closer to, and then obviously too, like we're, pitching and developing stuff that we'd love to work on together. And individually as well, like different passion projects and film and TV, all that stuff.
What would you say to someone out there that might be an aspiring filmmaker, might have the group of friends that they want to make stuff with, but they're just like, they need that little push? What would you tell them, like out of your experience with literally getting cameras with a group of friends and making 2 films now? Like, What do you have to say to those people?
I mean, if you already have a group of like-minded friends and like creative people, you're already ahead, because I think if you didn't have that, I'd say the first step would be find people that are interested in the same thing you're interested in, because it's awesome. You can talk about stuff, you can go see movies or whatever your art is, or whatever the thing is that you're trying to build together. There's just an infinite amount of like wisdom and I think inspiration you get from like the sort of just like actual like in person, just being around other people.
Yeah.
And then step 2 is like start making stuff that makes stuff for you. I know this is probably, said a lot and said and repackaged differently in many different ways, but it actually is the truth. Is like, because when you make something that you would actually like, that isn't what you think Sundance would like, or what, it's like, make something for you because like you're going to need that to fuel you, to give you the fuel to actually make this thing, because it's a lot of work. I mean, it's a lot of making a movie it's a serious time commitment. It's also like, forget about just the making of the movie. I mean, like if you're fortunate enough to get distribution and try to, there's all these, it's a very long process. We made Peak Season, we started shooting it in 2022 and
Wow.
we're just now releasing it. So you gotta be around people that are into the same stuff, that make you laugh, that it's like if it's like we all have like a group of friends or a person where it's like, man, I could just talk with them forever.
Yeah.
Or like, we should start a podcast because the stuff we're saying I mean, that's kind of it though, is like that might be the person or the people that, I don't know, you work with them on something and not having not trying to be too prescriptive with what you think it'll be.
Yeah.
Too, I think is the other one, maybe. Like,
that's good. Being open to just like whatever is going to come. I feel like in my own past, I've been shut off to things at times, and I have like either missed an opportunity or just like took a different route that I look back on and wish I was a little more open in those situations. Cause I think that's what's really hard. Like when when you go out to, you've probably wanted to be a filmmaker for a long time of your life. And like when you go out and you're like, I'm going to be a filmmaker, you're trying to take every step that you think is going to get you to that point. And a lot of times it is the derail that you go work at BuzzFeed and you go make clickbaity type videos, but then you meet a group of people that then you're going to start doing life with and creating art with. And I think that's just like what's so inspiring about your story and Henry's story and Ben and everybody in that troupe is seeing how you guys have all grown together as a unit and are making things together. I think it's hard to find sometimes, it's what you guys are doing is I think I told you this when I saw you at the premiere. It's like making a movie is a miracle.
Yeah.
Let alone making something that's watchable, And so I think that you're doing that, and it just shows that you guys the fact that you and Henry do you guys still live together?
We do not. He lives with his girlfriend.
There you go. That's probably like also a good
yeah.
tip
You know what?
for a collaborator.
That was an inevitable, like that worked out as it should.
Yeah.
I think, we get asked, we were asked quite a bit during like Q&As for Peak Season, like at different festivals, like how does co-directing work? How do you guys make it work? Do you guys ever like have disagreements? And it's like, of course we talk through creative like disagreements all the time. But I think we just have a very good, understanding of like, I mean, you can never get rid of ego.
Yeah.
Ego's always there, right?
Yeah.
And the people that say that they don't have an ego, I mean, that's kind of an ego thing, right? It's because you're like, well, I'm so awesome that I don't actually. It's like we all do, and that's fine.
Yeah.
And it's like, but I think we have an understanding and like a genuine sort of mutual respect where we're not like, oh, this is my scene, or like this is my. It's like we're just sort of realists about it. We're like, very similar to what you just said, making a movie is a miracle, like completing a movie is a miracle.
Yeah.
And just like being like, yo, this is so hard and like crazy, like what we're doing. Like we're putting all this time in, not getting paid to do something.
Yeah.
And like you gotta just love it and like respect that whoever has the best idea in a given moment yeah, they should. I would want them. I want to watch that movie. I don't want to watch the movie where it's like, there was a proxy battle happening between two people that sort of like damaged the thing. Although that does actually kind of sound interesting. Maybe. It's like a behind the scenes.
Yeah, I'm in. Do you have any kind of appetite to do your own thing, to make your own thing? Because what I'm fascinated by learning this from you is like, okay, the first film kind of came from Ben Coleman's true story. Yeah. The second film came from Henry's, upbringing, being there. I am curious about the Steven Kanter story of like, what is that? Are we just following some little piano wizard in Michigan? Like, what is this? Do you have that appetite to kind of step out, or is being in a collaboration with Henry the main goal for you?
No, I think there definitely is. No, there are definitely stories that are much closer to sort of my own lived experience, and that are sort of, I guess you could call them like another set of like passion projects. And yeah, I think Henry probably does too. I think, anyone who works in a creative partnership, right, there is a point at which, you have your own sort of things. And so those are things that one of them I'm working on now, which is, a script, and it's interesting, shifting over to like trying to write something by yourself, because you just don't have that, like, I have to get used to like,
it's so difficult after going from that.
Yeah. But I think no matter what is like, if and when, I make one of those projects, I would still be, really kind of looking to like this community of collaborators for like input, for their takes, like for their help.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's great. I can't wait to see that whenever that does come. I think it will inevitably come, the Steven Kanter movie, show, whatever that is. I just want to know, because I know there's another side of you too that I learned when we were doing the movie trailers, that you have this, like, these films have been these very grounded films, but I also know that you have this like big palette for things. And so I'm just interested to see more of you, and same for Henry too. And I've always loved both. I've been, obviously we're friends, but I've been a fan of both of you guys individually. So to see you two come together and make the film and have them work as well as they do, I think it's just been really, really cool to see. And I am excited to see that partnership move forward, as well as you guys as individuals.
Thanks, man.
It's like, you can like the Beatles and you can like Paul and John separately. Like, it's okay.
Oh, don't get me started on the Beatles.
Yeah. Which one are you?
I'm an obsessive.
But okay, so I have a couple more questions, and this is more tailored to our Create.Repeat audience. I really think like having you on the podcast today to talk about, making film and doing it, and that's amazing, and like we can talk about it from the mountaintops, but I am really curious, like, has there been a time where you really wanted to just give up? Have you ever contemplated like quitting, and like you're at these lowest moments? Like, I'd love for you to talk about that a little bit, because
never. I have no doubts. I've never had any doubts.
Well, hey guys, thank you so much for listening and watching.
And if you do, you shouldn't be doing. No, dude, it's every day, bro. Yeah, very, 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 very often. The self-doubt train. I don't know if I've ever fully gotten off of that train. I think sometimes it just slows down. Yeah, but it's chugging along. It's this global Amtrak of pain and suffering. Yeah. So I think kind of like sort of as I had mentioned before, like I just find that like anytime there's a creative project I'm working on, I find myself like, I don't know, you're just sort of like forced to confront things about yourself that you're either afraid of. And, I don't know. I would suspect that the things that slow me down or give me doubts are pretty common. They have to do with like, I'm not good enough. What are people going to think of me if I do this? It's like, I have nothing to say, all of the things that your mind will sort of come up with to sort of get you, to stay in your sort of comfort zone. So the advice, I think the advice would be it's like when you're in those moments, take a look at like, what is the actual environment that you're in? And by what I mean by that is like both physically and like mentally, is like, where are you at when you're having those moments? Are you having those moments when you're like not writing and you should be writing? or you know what I mean? It's like, oh, I've set this time for me to write, and instead I'm just like, oh God, I shouldn't do this. Why am I doing this? Like, this is bad idea. It's like, oh, I waited too long to do this. I don't have it anymore. You know, okay, that's evidence for something. It's like, okay, well, that's happening when I'm here. So why don't I like change that environment and try this again? Where it's like it could just be like a literal change in environment. Like, I'm going to go to this coffee shop or whatever. And maybe that might be something that, because I feel like our brains and our bodies is like, we're so habitual, and we have to be really, I think honestly, like artists or creative people have to be really, really careful to like sort of maintain the mental state.
Yeah.
David Lynch, you know, one of my favorite weird filmmakers, he makes dark, very, very dark, strange movies, right? That you're like, this is the most nightmarish thing I've ever seen. You know what he says about writing is like, if he is anxious or in any way has any kind of negative feeling, he can't write, and he won't let himself write. Meaning he needs to be in a place of like joy, but at the very least contentment.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing that and being so like surprised, because I would have thought like, oh man, this guy like, he needs to be just like upside down, like hanging like a bat and just like drinking and, you know, like whatever. Like, but it's, I think it says a lot that like making sure that it's like, well, what are you even doing in your own life to like take care of yourself?
Yeah.
And your own sort of like mental state. Like, are you waking up and feeling anxious? And it's like, taking care of that first, because that's not going to be solved by pushing that down and then hating yourself more for not making the thing that you're trying to make. I mean, and I don't know. It's just, things are so much easier when you're like having fun, I think is the other part of it too.
Yeah.
Like all of the doubts suddenly go away, or it's like you're with a group of friends that you like riff a lot. Yeah. I know like certainly this is the case for you. Like, it's just, there's something so effortless, and yet you're like coming up with like things that are like very, very good, you know, like very funny or very witty or whatever they are. So being in a place, trying to get yourself into a place of contentment and like thinking about your environment, what is actually leading to these thoughts?
That's so good. Especially like just remembering to have fun in that. I think that's like such a, like, it could be like, oh, that's so cliche, but it's something to remember, because like as creatives, like, you know, one of my favorite sayings is like, the joy is in the making. It really is in the process of it. And like, even when we're looking back on these two films, you know, it's like, you're going to look back at the final product and that's amazing. But what you're really going to remember is that process of making it with these people that you love, and how you grew together and the lessons that you learned from each other. And like that process of making something, that is something that I am so fascinated with. And I have to remind myself all the time that, oh yeah, remember, this is fun. And finding those group of people that bring that out of you, I think is so helpful. Cause it's like, you know, we've all experienced that. If you're a filmmaker, if you're author, writer, you know, musician, when you sit down, you're like, all right, let me write my Sundance film. And it's like, you know, fade in, and you're like, this opening shot has to be perfect. I read Save the Cat. I need to know this image right here. And then you're automatically putting so much pressure on it. But yeah, having fun to do that. Cause I love that you said that, and taking care of yourself, man. Like, it's huge. I think like I'm very like anti like the tortured artist motif. I think it's really played out. I think it's you don't have to be so tortured to create good art.
No.
If anything. And it's like, I think the second that you get into, you know, that next arena where it's starting to happen, and like you're saying, like you just made a film and now you're in this area where you're with all of the other filmmakers that are now in this new arena, the South by Southwest crowd or whatever, like people have features, you realize that you have to have stamina in order to keep going. And if you're going to keep this like persona of like, I'm the tortured artist, I'm the emo kid with that, like, don't get me wrong, part of me likes it, you know, put on some My Chemical Romance, sure. But, you know, I do think that there's I'm so happy that mental health and everything is like being discussed more specifically with creatives, because we do deal with, we're building worlds in our head, and the ones that people see are just the ones of the work that we produce. But that doesn't mean the other worlds that we're building in our head aren't there. And yeah, I think that's so important.
I mean, it's sort of, it's very ironic. The whole thing is really ironic when I like think about it, because it's, yes, the tortured artist thing I sort of reject. I reject this sort of like very base, obvious interpretation of it, which is, okay, what is the tortured artist? The tortured artist is like this moody, temperamental, angry, negative feeling artist that's a genius or something, and they're able to translate this pain and suffering, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, I reject the part of that where it's like the actual making of the thing, that being tortured is conducive to making that great thing. I actually think that, like, contentment, you actually have greater access to negative emotions, or you can sort of, I guess it's essentially processing those things, right? It's like, in order to process those things, you got to process those things. And then once you do that, though, I've found that, like, again, when I say like, find contentment, and then you can creatively, that'll help. I mean, it doesn't just mean that you'll just be making happy-go-lucky things. Like, it could be dark, fucking awesome, emo, like whatever the thing is, or your David Lynch movie, or like your nightmarish Hereditary thing. Yeah. It's just ironic, though, and strange that it's like the reverse of what you would think. Because, like, I believe, and maybe people are different, but I believe that for me, like, to make something truly fucking dark and great, you got to be coming from a place of like contentment, because then you can actually have full access to the spectrum of emotions. Right. And you're not just like in this kill or be killed. And like you said too, that's so apt. Like, you're just not going to sustain yourself. Like, you'll join the 27 club, which is cool. No,
clubs are cool.
Clubs are cool.
But yeah, no, it's so true. It's like when you're in those moments, I find it's always great to like journal or write down thoughts, and then come back to those thoughts with a clear mind, you know, because I know for me personally, like, if I'm in a super dark space, I'm not necessarily working with logic here. I'm very much like just feeling an emotion, and it's good to express yourself that way, but to always come back to it with a clear head, especially in a medium with film where there's so many people involved. Oh yeah. I think it can for sure be different if, for someone that has like a solo type of art, you can create however you create. Everyone's process is different, but I definitely think like in the film world, that like toxic masculinity, I'm the director, I'm going to yell at everybody, I'm going to belittle these actors. It's so played out. Yeah. And it's how are we, like, you still hear stories about that. Like, how are we still dealing with that in 2024?
Sort of romanticizing this idea that, you have to be sort of this patriarchal kind of like tyrant in order to create great work. And it's like, there's so many examples of that not being the case. I mean, sure, there are examples of like great directors who unfortunately happen to sort of run sets like that, but it's like, I mean,
then again,
it's
like,
not conducive.
Talk to me after your first studio film, though. We'll hear like how
I'm gonna change.
You're just
become a complete
we'll revisit
monster.
This in 3 years. I'll be like, so
no, I'm too sensitive, honestly, to ever do that. Like, I remember like in film school, like one of the first like real sets that I was like directing, and like I was going through all this stuff internally of like, oh my god, like, and I was like so concerned with looking like a director that I would. I'd walk around and I don't know. It was awful. It was actually like kind of an awful experience, because I was like, I don't feel good right now. Yeah. And
why
then
do I
realized like, I'm trying to just like, why am I focusing on like, first of all, this is not making the movie. I'm just like, what am I here to get a picture of me doing this? Like, like, oh cool. I now I'm a director. It's like, no, like, don't you do it the way that you do it. And like, I mean, it's like you said, it's such a collaborative art form that you really come to like, you need to rely and respect the people that you're working with, like, because truthfully, they are better at what that's what I love about film is like, you bring in like a DP and it's like, sure, I can shoot stuff. Henry and I can shoot stuff, but it's like, if we're bringing in a DP, like, I'm like, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Like, we get someone who is like able to
just an ace.
an
That's just
ace
there.
who just like I want them to feel like excited about it.
Yeah.
I don't want them to just be like, oh, you're my like employer right
Yeah.
now. Like, cool, let's go make art. Like,
There's nothing better than being on a set or with a team of people where everybody is the best at what they do. I was on a set where like the prop master was just like, he took his job so seriously that it truly, I think about it probably once a week of how inspired I was by this person, where there's a scene where it's like a sandwich is being eaten and he had like 9 sandwiches with the perfect bite and making sure that it was there. And just seeing someone work the way that they work and the care that they put into it, it makes you put extra care into your work and just appreciate the job that these people do. And anyone who, you know, hasn't had the pleasure of being on a set or seeing a movie, like it is like that. There are on these bigger projects, there are hundreds of people doing their job to the best of their ability, and every person's job is needed.
yeah.
It is, you know, like if the prop master doesn't have the prop, okay. It's you know, you might have an entire day ruined, and that's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I love that, but I'm talking to the person. You should probably put prop master also on your IMDb pro page.
God, yeah.
But okay, well, I'm wrapping up here, but like I'm so just like as a friend and an admirer, I'm just so happy for you and Henry and the gang of just making these films and do that. It's so inspiring just seeing you guys go out and do it, and you are making more of what you guys want to see in this era where people might think movies are dying or thinking that you can only make a superhero movie and all that stuff. You guys are going out there and making these heartfelt, funny movies that I know that you and I both love these types of movies. And so like seeing you guys make that, it's so inspiring. And I really hope that our audience goes and checks out both of these films. Peak Season is out right now, anywhere where you can rent things or buy. Please do support the cause. Is there any other like plug, a website or anything that people can learn?
I mean, peakseasonfilm.com. Yeah, we'll have all of the info, where to find it. But yeah, thank you for having me, man.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
We got to get, maybe, I don't know, we were talking about like doing another fake trailer. I mean,
I think, maybe we do it. Maybe we slip it into this right now. It just cuts to it. No.
that would be a great place to cut.
That would be great. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
All right, handshake. This is what we do.
Oh, this is specific?
I don't know.
to the
I'm just
podcast.
making it up. But yeah, for the audio listeners, we just shook hands.
We just shook hands.
Yeah. But all right. Thanks for listening to this episode of Create.Repeat.
Disconnected but doing what I was called to do. In tune, tuned in full pursuit. And I've seen what karma can do. So do good and let that good come back to you.